Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here. I just got out of seeing a movie that's definitely going to be in my top 10 for the year, perhaps even my top 5. And depending upon how I feel in the morning, who knows, maybe my number 1. But the movie I'm talking about is a love story called Cold War. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to be butchering the pronunciation of a lot of Polish names. But the director of this film is Paweł Pawlikowski. I'm new to his work, but I know a lot of people hold his previous film, Ida, in very high regard. I got in to see it a little early at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, but it's coming out in a couple weeks through Amazon Studios. And I first heard about it because the director won Best Director at Cannes this past spring, but also a good friend of mine by the name of Rob Cotto. He was ranting and raving about it after seeing it at the New York Film Festival. And the film's loosely based on the director's parents, but it basically follows two young lovers in Poland from the late 40s through the mid 60s. One's a composer and piano player, one's a singer. And we basically follow them through their trials and tribulations as the ebb and flow of the tides of history pull them apart, smash them back together, etc. The movie's only 85 minutes long, but honestly, I could have stayed in this world for another 4 hours. Because when it comes to movies about music and movies about love, I don't know if this movie's going to be challenged or dethroned anytime soon. Honestly, if you're a filmmaker out there and you're writing a screenplay that's your kind of generic, predictable love story, if you were to see this movie, you'd probably just throw up your hands in despair and just quit entirely. And this movie couldn't have come along at a better time for me because I really needed a great movie-going experience because I have a weird relationship with this period of the year. I know a lot of people really look forward to award season. They love debating all the Golden Globe nominations and the SAG nominations and the Academy Award nominations. But what I hate about this time of the year is that you basically are subjected to conversations about the same 10 to 15 movies for months on end. And it gets to the point where I never want to watch those movies or hear about those movies ever again. And I don't know if I'm the only person who feels this way, but I hate how award season makes seeing certain movies feel like this obligatory chore or responsibility as opposed to something that should cause great joy and excitement. When I first became movie crazy back in college, I never looked at watching great movies like homework or an assignment. And I think in recent years, I've allowed myself to fall into this trap where I watch particular movies because they're part of the conversation, as opposed to just watching movies that I'm jumping out of my skin to see. And I wasn't necessarily looking forward to seeing Cold War until I watched the trailer. Once I saw the trailer, within seconds I knew this was a movie that I had to see. The movie's shot in glorious black and white. It uses the Academy ratio, basically the ratio that most movies were shot in back in the 30s and 40s. And it's shot in such a beautiful classic fashion. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that this movie perhaps was some sort of rediscovered classic that had been rotting in a vault for 60 years, but had basically been dusted off and restored and then re-released. Because as much as this movie might be a love story and a movie about a relationship, it in no way, shape, or form resembles traditional love stories that might be coming out of Hollywood. This is a very grim, very practical love story about what it means to fall in love in a communist country. It's a world where if you're a singer or a piano player or an artist of any kind, you might suddenly find the arm of the government coming in and telling you that from this point forward, you're going to be creating propaganda for the government, whether you like it or not. So I feel like it's hard enough to be a great artist. It's hard enough to be two artists falling in love. It's even more difficult to be two artists falling in love when history is just trying to rip you apart. And I can't say enough about the two leads. Joanna Kulig plays Zula, and Thomas Koht, if I'm saying that correctly, plays Victor. And a quick side note, apparently Thomas Koht was Danny Boyle's choice to be the next Bond villain. And when his choice for the Bond villain got shot down, that was what led to a parting of the ways between Danny Boyle in the latest Bond installment. But having now seen Thomas Koht in this movie, I have to say I think Danny Boyle is probably correct. He's an astonishingly good actor. But the real show stealer is Joanna Kulig. Joanna Kulig is just an absolute force of nature in this movie. And the way we get introduced to her is absolutely incredible because early in the film, in 1949, Poland is basically trying to put together a musical institute that can perform a variety of shows that'll basically be a cultural exchange with the rest of Europe. And what they're essentially trying to do is recruit as many singers and dancers as humanly possible who can recreate and celebrate the best of Polish folk music. And Joanna Kulig's character, Zula, is not necessarily what they're looking for, but she's hell-bent upon getting into this institute and joining this show. And she's got enormous talent as a singer, but she also has this incredibly dynamic, almost dangerous level of charisma. But when the character Victor starts to express an interest in her, some people warn him about her past because she recently got out of jail for trying to kill her father. And when Victor asks her how come she ended up in prison, she very casually, almost flippantly says, well, my father mistook me for my mother, so I used a knife on him to show him the difference. Because as a young, beautiful woman who has survived World War II and as a young, beautiful woman who is dealing with the realities of Cold War Europe, she is absolutely first and foremost a survivor, and she has a spine of steel. And I think if you have a pulse, if you're alive on this earth and you watch this movie, it's basically impossible not to fall in love with her. Because everything she applies herself to in her life, she goes all the way. If she's drinking booze aggressively. If she's making love, she's basically eating her partner. If she's singing and dancing on the stage, she is absolutely hurling herself into it. She just has this incredible appetite for life and experience that I found absolutely irresistible. And no scene probably captures that better than in a nightclub scene in France. We're getting into the late 50s and rock and roll has emerged on the scene, and Bill Haley's tune Rock Around the Clock comes on, and Joanna Kulig just goes fucking crazy. She hits the floor, she's spinning around. Any guy without a partner, she's grabbing him. At one point, there's this great bit where she's dancing with a guy, and we see the guy's girlfriend basically pulling him away from her, and she ends up on the bar. She's just going completely, utterly berserk. And it's one of the most fun sequences I've seen in a movie in recent memory. But the movie's not all fun and games. Even the love scenes, there's a hint of danger and a hint of tragedy. And there's violence, or at least the threat of violence, lurking around every corner. Because in spite of life pulling them apart in different relationships, they do eventually find each other again in France. But even there, their artistic ambitions and or their artistic concessions and compromises, working in filmmaking, working with local poets, your standard petty jealousies and rivalries that exist between artists definitely start to rear their ugly head. And at one point, Zula decides to go back to Poland, a country that, in spite of its current political climate, is the one place where she feels like she truly belongs. And when Victor chases her back to Poland, he ends up getting thrown in a prison. And as a way of teaching him a lesson from defecting away from Poland in the first place, they smash all the fingers on his right hand. This is a guy who is a composer and a piano player. They're basically depriving him of his livelihood forever. So there's a lot of darkness to this movie that a lot of people will find upsetting. But there's something about the darkness in the movie that gives the love story that much more intensity and urgency. And I just found myself completely falling under the movie's spell. In any event, this movie is getting a limited release in a couple weeks, but because it's Amazon Studios, it is only a matter of time before it ends up on Amazon Prime. And I strongly urge everyone to at least watch the trailer. If the trailer jumps out at you, you're absolutely going to fall in love with this movie. And also in a few months' time, we very well might be seeing this film win the Best Foreign Film Award at the Academy Awards because it is Poland's official entry this year. So I'll be rooting for it all the way. At any rate, I think I've showered this movie with enough praise at this point. I think what I'm going to do next is just throw in Ida, because if it's half as good as Cold War, I'm going to be a very happy fan. But if you've enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to talk movies, you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrax. I'm there every day. But I can't thank you enough for watching my review. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.